Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity Podcast by Teasels. And today I'm joined by Hannah Needham from Rewilding. Hello, Hannah. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Daniel. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Just tripping over that intro before we got started. Hannah, do you want to just give a bit of an introduction to yourself before we get started?
Sure. So my name's Hannah Needham. I'm based in the south of England, and I'm the junior director for a new charity called Rewilding. So we've been around for about a year, and we're on a mission to rewild land across England.
Fantastic. So before you became the junior director of Heal, do you want to give a bit of background of how your kind of your journey from where you are now and how you arrived at Heal?
Yeah, sure. So I was always really fascinated by science and biology, but I didn't quite know exactly what I wanted to do. I ended up following the academic route, doing a PhD, realizing my career was going towards the pharmaceutical route, and I panicked and I thought, we need to do so much more about climate change and the biodiversity emergency. So I went off piste and started volunteering like crazy for all sorts of different wildlife charities. And so after doing some practical stuff with the Wildlife Trust, getting my chainsaw license, looking after livestock, all that kind of really hands-on land management stuff, I then also worked a bit for Natural England, and then I worked in river restoration before meeting the lovely people at Heal and ending up here.
Wow. So I've got to take you back, and then that was quite a flip, really, because doing a PhD and kind of being no doubt super focused on that, or you having to be super focused, and then taking a sort of an about turn. And so I've got to ask, was it sort of, what was the sort of the big thing for you? Did you just sort of the stuff around Extinction Rebellion and it coming to the fore, and the climate emergency, or were you tuned in sort of before that?
That kind of, it did creep up on me. So when I got to uni, left school, left home, started thinking a bit more for myself and started seeing what was going on in the news, people talking about climate change, and obviously studying it as well at uni. I did biology, so I studied it. And I kind of got more and more alarmed about what I was seeing and reading. And I felt like I was the only one in my peer group who was as concerned as I was. And when I speak to people about it, I'd get quite a lot of, oh, well, nothing can be done. It's just a fault of humanity. Humans are the problem, and it's never going to get resolved as long as humans are on this planet. And I was just thinking, that is not the mindset. So, that was growing and building inside me. And then when I got to PhD level, you're supposed to be really committed and into your subject area at that point. And firstly, I ended up doing something where what was involved was testing on animals. And it was only fish. But when I was seeing how many fish were being killed, bred to be killed all the time, and it wasn't just fish, it was all sorts of animals. That was really bugging me. But also the amount of plastic that was used and not recycled, because it contains DNA that might contaminate the environment and all these different things. So it has to be just incinerated. And I saw the carbon footprint of everything that we were doing, but yet I didn't have any idea how it was being mitigated. And it seemed to really only bug me and nobody else. And that's when I realized that I was doing the wrong thing and I was in the wrong place.
So you found the right place, because we've been chatting previously about Heal. Do you want to give a bit of background on the people at Heal? Because I was blown away by, well, firstly yourself and what you've done, and the trustees as well. I'd love you to tell the viewers more about Heal as an organisation.
Well, everyone at Heal has been on a similar journey to me, so has been working in business or working in a different sector, and has come to realise that we need to do a lot more about climate change and biodiversity than we are. So nobody has a long background in nature conservation or anything similar. We've got people with business backgrounds, finance, PR, various different things. And the way I got introduced to this group was that, as I say, when I left and decided I needed to devote my time to the environment, I was frustrated at how few opportunities there were to do anything. You know, you could sign up to volunteer and do days here and there, but I felt like that impact wasn't big enough. So I set up a local volunteer group in my area who, and, you know, went straight to the councils to talk about rewilding and to talk about climate change. And I, through doing that, met somebody else who was doing exactly the same thing, but at a different stage of life to me. The trustees are older than I am and a different stage of life, and they're thinking about how climate change is going to impact their children and their grandchildren. And, you know, through that kind of mutual interest and the fact that we were taking action in the same way to contact councils and to speak to politicians, we kind of noticed each other. And I bumped into this wonderful woman called Jan, who was kind of thinking about retirement, and then decided, actually, no, let's set up a national charity to rewild across the UK, because that would be more fun and more impactful. And she just, the way she talked about it was she can't sit back and not, you know, if you see something you love in trouble, you can't sit back and watch that happen. So yeah.
So it's really interesting as you're talking there. I think that you know, as your example, there's a million examples out there of people, you know, wanting to pull in this same direction, and it's trying to find the vehicles in which we can all, you know, move in the same direction. Because I really feel that there is a growing, meaningful cultural shift towards this now. I was going to say it's on the verges, on the periphery. I sincerely feel that, you know, that there is a, you know, a movement that of people, and I think like Hill was doing, we just need to find a vehicle in which to put our energies, you know, into.
And that's what I see rewilding as. So when I got introduced to it in 2018, it was something that not many people knew about. It was a word that people hadn't heard very often. And my kind of circle at that time was wildlife conservationists. And they talked about rewilding and said, some say, oh, it's just a romantic fantasy that will never happen. Some were really interested in, okay, well, what makes rewilding and conservation different, and wanted to get bogged down in the definitions. And so that's where I came at it from, thinking, okay, so how is it different? And if you're going to set up a rewilding group, why is that different from a conservation group? And now I don't even think about that sort of stuff anymore. To me, rewilding is the cultural shift. It has so many things in common with wildlife conservation, but it's just, for some reason at the moment, seeming to attract the attention of so many people that weren't particularly interested in the last 20, 30 years in conservation for whatever reason.
Because I again, it's quite interesting, because I don't want, you're right, you don't want to get bogged down in conservation, rewilding, but it's that phrase that that people just, when I'm in conversations, it's just synonymous with, you know, rewilding, you know, regardless of whether it is, you know, it is rewilding in the sense of what's going on at NEP, what's going on in other places in and around England. But yeah, it's no, it's great. It gives that handle for people to really latch onto. So
I think people really like rewilding because it's sort of, to me, it's about reversing the damage.
Yeah.
And what we've talked a lot about over the last few decades is stopping the damage and protecting what we have left. But rewilding is all about protecting what we have left and then making more of it.
Yeah.
And finding a new future, not trying to kind of stop what's happening. It's more ambitious, and it's important to note that we couldn't save these species and make more of them if we hadn't worked so hard on wildlife conservation. Without wildlife conservation, we wouldn't have any of these things left. But it's not enough on its own, and rewilding is, you know, synonymous with hope and optimism, and it just really inspires people.
And it inspires, you know, you can actually go to, as the sort of figurehead page, you can go to NEP, you can see what's actually happening. And you're right, it is hopeful, because there's so much bad news out there that this is what happens. This is what can happen if, you know, you allow nature to, if you give nature a chance, you know, and it's not fluffiness, it's quantifiable. I mean, how many species do we see there? How many species that are on the red list? How many, as a figurehead, is it the purple emperor, you know, that's there, the white stork, you know, it's hopeful, but it's quantifiable, and we can see it in action.
It's like, it's a little bit like stepping back in time. So
Yes.
you know,
We
like
love a bit we do love a bit of nostalgia. I guess that's part of it as well, isn't it?
like my grandparents grew up and where they, you know, they lived in the countryside, they could hear turtle doves all the time, every summer. That was just standard. Whereas when I read about that sort of thing, I have no idea what it means because I've never experienced it. But if you go to Nep and you see all of this abundance of insects. So, you know the whole thing where back in the day when you drive your car, you wipe the windscreen because it would be covered in insects. Well, you don't get that anywhere, but you would get that at Nep. So it is a little like, it's a little pocket of kind of, of nostalgia. And it's really endearing and people love it.
So with Healed, so for the viewers at home, what are your aims, you know, short, medium and long term? What do you actually want to achieve at Heal?
Okay, so the short term aim, so our mission is very simple. I say this, I'm going to forget it. Our mission is very simple. It's raise money, buy land, rewild it. So pretty straightforward. And it came from, you know, there's a major charity in the UK, well, the major charity for rewilding in the UK is Rewilding Britain.
Yeah.
They're a small organisation doing amazing work, lobbying MPs, working with landowners, you know, the people who are at the top in a position of power, trying to convince them how, you know, the benefits of rewilding. But there isn't much scope in there for really keen individuals to help with that, because it just doesn't, it needs, you know, a few subject matter experts. It doesn't need hordes of volunteers. So there's all this energy and enthusiasm bubbling up for rewilding, particularly because of Isabella Tree's book, but there's kind of not many channels for people to actually, you know, do anything about that enthusiasm, put their energy into anything meaningful. So, you know, I was one of those people for a long time, you're desperate for any kind of rewilding opportunity, writing to people saying, how can I help? And then finding out, well, you can't really yet. So this charity, Heal, was set up to empower everybody to get involved in rewilding. And so the idea is that we're going to have publicly open spaces that are going to be, at the point of acquiring them, they'll be degraded land. So, you know, land that has been in some kind of damaging land use for a while. Maybe, you know, the wetlands have been drained. Maybe it's been, you know, basically abused by us, as much of our countryside has. And you leave the land really to go fallow, and you put back the elements of the ecosystem that we know are missing and allow the ecosystem to kind of heal itself. So it's a minimal intervention approach. You know, we're not going to go power tools and engineer the landscape. We're going to let animals do it themselves because they know how to do it best. And one of the really exciting things about Heal is our Heal 3x3 sponsorship system. So all of the land at our sites will be divided up into 3x3 meter squares using what 3 words addressing system. So the kind of alternative to Google Maps, what 3 words is really cool. Yeah. And anyone is able to sponsor a square of land on our site for a year, 3 years, you know, their whole life. And they'll be able to watch, and they'll be able to come and visit that square and see how it changes from the point, from the, you know, the day that we acquire the land, when it's got very little biodiversity value. They'll be able to watch that square change over time. And you can give these squares as gifts, or you can sponsor them for yourself, or you can do a big family patch or a big patch for your organization. So that is one tangible way that people can feel really connected to a rewilding project. And that's really important because so many of the rewilding projects at the moment are being done by private landowners. And that's amazing that they're doing that, but it restricts how, you know, there aren't that many places that people can go and see. So it's all about engaging with people, having safe and accessible places where everyone can come.
Okay. So yeah, perfect. Yeah. And then yeah.
So, well, the medium term. So we're starting with a site in the south, and then we will be going to the north. And then pretty much from there, it will be a heal site in every English county as and when they become available. And our goal is a site in every English county by 2050, which is at 500 acres a site, approximately 10,000 hectares.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. So 500 acres a site by 2050 is 10,000 hectares. You might want to check that maths, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
So maths aside, though, what I'm picking up from what you're saying is that it's the the connectivity as well. So having so I guess part of the idea would be have that connectivity between those sites. So at least you can see that there is a link from the south to the north. I mean, broadly speaking, a link from the south to the north, and these don't just become islands; they are part of a more of a connective network.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons we've chosen the lowlands as well. So I didn't mention that earlier. We're a lowland specific charity, and that's because there is a school of thought that the highlands are inaccessible in terms of they can't really be used for towns and cities, so people can't relocate there, and they're more difficult to farm. So maybe they should be our nature rich areas. We should rewild the highlands, and we should use the lowlands for us, which is makes more sense, I suppose, in ways that in terms of transport. But actually then you risk having really, really urbanized areas and really, really nature rich areas that only like the privileged few can access. And so it is important to rewild the highlands, but it's also important to have rewilding areas in the lowlands, because if people can't see nature, if they can't get to nature within a 10 to 30-minute drive, real wilderness, then how are they going to fight to protect it? How are they going to vote for green policies? How are they going to support charities? Why would they? If it's something that isn't for them, then they won't support it. So if we really are going to do something about biodiversity and climate change, then we really need to make it for everybody and not the privileged few, as it has been for far too long.
That's so powerful. I mean, I don't think we need to go over. It's been said 1,000 times. Our connection to nature over the time of COVID. I mean, that's been said 1,000 times. But you're dead right. If we don't know what we're saving, we're not connecting to it. How can we change? How can we change our views towards it?
And something really interesting I heard when I went to it was a kind of day-long event run by London Wildlife Trust, and they were talking about urban kind of wildlife volunteering.
Yes.
They said that one of the ways that so many charities fall down is they kind of only ever focus on the really rare species. So they'll only want to report a sighting of a really rare bird, or they'll only want to protect really, really rare species. And it really alienates people, because if you're somebody who lives in a town and you only really ever get to see ladybirds and robins and squirrels, they are still important to you and they're your experience of nature. And if you never see that represented in the wildlife charities, like in their communications and anything, then you just think, well, that's not for me. I was talking about turtle doves earlier, and everyone raves about the turtle doves at Net, but it's I've never seen one, I've never heard one. No. So does that appeal to me and my generation? Not particularly. So you need to think about everybody.
I love this. It's you've got it right from day one. It's that inclusivity.
Exactly. Exactly, and that is in all aspects. So is it affordable for people to come to your sites? Can they actually get there from a city if they don't have a car? All of these things need to be thought about. And if the answer to any of those is no, then you need to figure out, okay, well, what do I have to do? What do we have to do as an organisation to make sure there is provision for those people? And we're starting to think about having women-only tours, just whatever we can to make sure that nobody's left out. And even things, having loads of sets of spare wellies on site, so that people who are from towns and don't have that sort of thing and don't have the money to buy that sort of thing can still come and experience the site at its fullest and don't feel held back.
Yeah. Sorry, I think that's just. I think that's. But no, it's so great. You know, it's so great to hear. And that because you mentioned earlier about, you know, it's not for the privileged few. You know, like, don't get me wrong for 1 second. Nep's great, but you know, how many people can go camping there? How many people can?
I know.
Um, how do people get there? Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean,
But because there's such demand at NEP, so that's the main problem with it. Yes, it's expensive, and it's not criticism of NEP. You know, they obviously need to make money to keep going, and it's an expensive business. So, you know, it's expensive to go, but it sells out so quickly. You know, you have to book months and months and months in advance. So that just goes to show that there is so much demand. People want places like that to go to. So that's what makes our business case stronger, because you say, okay, you know, we can go to big funders and say, well, look, NEP is the only thing like this really in the country. And it sells out instantly. We need more of them, and we need more of them not just near London. We need them everywhere. We need them near Bristol. We need them in the north, in the Midlands. So yeah.
so in terms of the funding mechanisms, what so you mentioned earlier about people buying 3x3 squares, but can you go into a bit more detail about, you know, potential funding mechanisms, that you know, how businesses can get involved?
So we've got about 12 different income streams, which I won't list all of. But so Heal 3x3 is our main way to get people involved and for them to feel like they have a part of the site, through their sponsorship. We also have a Friends of Heal scheme. So it's like membership. So we get support through, you know, regular support through that, and regular donations, which is how we keep going on a day-to-day basis. We also have some businesses who, from, you know, very early on, so when we were about 3 months old, got in contact with us straight away and said, you know, how can we support you? And we've had, you know, money coming in from them steadily, which actually is going up and up all the time, which is really, really positive. So, you know, they were on board from very early on, where we were more of a concept, and now that we actually are more of an organization, we've got, you know, 220 odd volunteers now. We get support is growing, so the regular support for businesses is really, really good. And then
I must say, what you've, looking from the outside in, what you guys have achieved is pretty amazing, really. And I won't, you know, I won't ask you to name those businesses, but good on them. Good on them, you know. See, and then putting money where their mouth is, which is basically what I'm getting at. You know, they like the idea, but they're supporting it. That's great.
what you'll find is that everyone sort of knows that businesses are going to have to start doing more for climate and biodiversity. And, you know, if you start doing that now and get ahead of the curve, you'll be best placed. And it's the kind of, if you just sit back and think, oh well, you know, I'll deal with that later, and, you know, it's not going to help the businesses themselves. So it's about, you know, it's not me who has these conversations every day with the businesses. It's Jan, so our chair of trustees. So we have very different roles and we complement each other. She has most of those, and she's on the phone pretty much all day, every day, just introducing Heal to people, explaining our aims, talking through what we're going to do, getting to know people. And it's through those conversations that you meet people in businesses, you know, individuals who are really interested in climate change, really interested in rewilding, and they say, oh, I'll put you in touch with so and so. And through those relationships, we have just managed to make loads of really, really good partnerships. So we've got that regular support, which is amazing. And then the thing is, with our fundraising target, it's pretty big. So because we want to have a site of about 500 acres each time, and the reason for that is because we would like to have herds of free roaming animals to manage the land so that we don't manage it. So 500 acres is about big enough that we could have some cattle, some pigs, some ponies, roaming freely. And so if you're looking in the south of England for a site that big that also has buildings, so we would like to have buildings that we can convert rather than, you know, putting up new buildings, which would be bad for the environment, to convert existing buildings. You're looking at about 5 to 10 million a site. And there aren't that many as well, which we've learned. So we're getting about one a month in our inbox. So it's difficult, but it's
Mm.
quite a big fundraising target. So all of the money that's coming in is amazing, and it's keeping us ticking over, which is brilliant. You know, this time last year, we would, if we knew that we were in this position, we'd be over the moon. Like, it's wonderful. But yeah, so when it comes to actually getting the money for land acquisition at that size, it's a combination of grants and trusts. So going, you know, funding applications, explaining our mission to people, seeing if we can win a funding bid, but also going to big money for big money. And so this means, you know, finding people.
Can I ask about big? So, if I'm a big business, like, is there, how can I put this? Is there sort of tax advantages to as well, other than obviously that I think, you know, there's a moral obligation to do it, but what's also the incentive for sort of the bigger businesses out there? Does that form part of their CSR, the corporate social responsibility?
Best place to answer that, because I haven't been involved in the finer details of the conversations, so I couldn't tell you. Jan could, but I couldn't. But what we've been exploring with some big UK-based businesses is more, rather than a huge donation of several million, is actually kind of very, very, very low interest loans.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, the incentive for organisations like that, because not only, you know, do they get the interest, and it's a green investment, but they do have that biodiversity tag, and it's really good PR for them. So they are seen to be doing something good for the environment, but they also genuinely are doing something good for the environment. So it's a win-win, really.
So, and how does the carbon credits system at the moment fit into, you know, what HEAL are doing?
So we're exploring that at the moment. We're new to it, and we've had some conversations with some carbon credit brokers, so specialists in the UK, about what would work for a rewilding site. And the reason it's kind of unknown right now is that the carbon credit system is geared more to woodland creation. So there are loads of grants, loads of interest at the moment in tree planting. So that system is currently geared up to that idea of, we plant this many seedlings, you know, we know because of the density of the woodland what size the trunk is going to be, we can calculate accurately how much carbon there will be. Yeah. So it's not designed right now for rewilding, which would be, you know, a natural regeneration approach to reforesting. So there's some interesting work being done by some small startups in that area that we're speaking to, and we'd love to be one of the pilot sites for it. But why it's trickier is, I suppose, it's a bit more experimental, because you can't really predict the rate at which these trees are going to regenerate. You don't know necessarily how many deer are going to be in the area and how, you know, are going to be nibbling away at your seedlings. Yeah. That might be a problem, it might not. So it actually needs to be much more evidence-based. And so there is a group trying to have applied to the carbon code to get the system changed, so that there is a new way of quantifying the carbon, which isn't based on, I planted this many trees. It's actually based on the data from your site. So they would go do 3D imaging using satellites to quantify how much carbon you've got, ideally in the soil, but also just in the plants themselves, and also in all of the leaves and every aspect of the tree, not just the trunk, which is the way that the woodland carbon code currently calculates it. And the reason it's like that is because so many woodlands are actually commercial forestry. Yeah. So it's, you know, it works for the majority of woodlands right now, but we're hoping that it will shift in the future to be a bit more adaptable for projects like ours.
Can we give those guys a bit of a name check, that startup?
Yeah, so the people we've been speaking to the most are Tree Economy.
Yeah.
So they are a young organisation full of young people, bright graduates from Imperial who've worked in business and have had a look at the carbon credit system and thought, this doesn't actually necessarily apply to everybody. And what's really interesting is that they have had very positive conversations with people that want to buy carbon credits, but who really want a biodiversity tag along with it. So they want to offset the carbon from, you know, their business, whether they manufacture something, or they want to offset that carbon, but they also want to put on, you know, on the label of whatever they're selling, we've helped restore beaver wetlands, or you know, help to reintroduce eagles somewhere. So they really want that tag, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. So there is appetite out there, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Suppose, yeah, no, there's the cynic in me says, yeah, it's, you know, hopefully it's people's goodwill, but I guess it comes down to companies' PR as well, you know, so it goes a bit beyond greenwashing.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we say at Heal that, you know, capitalism isn't ideal, and the way it works right now is one of the reasons that our environment is getting so degraded. But the reality is, it is the system we're in, and so we have to use that. And so if it benefits a business to help the environment and genuinely help the environment, not just say that they are, then go for it. That's, you know, that's what I think anyway.
Yeah, no, too right. So I want to take you back to some of that's stuck with me earlier about trying to find these sites, because I guess we're all under so much pressure on land, especially in the south. I mean, how does one go about finding sites? Because it must be, you know, it must be really difficult.
It is. But we're very lucky. So we've found a land agent who gets Rewilding and who gets our organisation. So we've got a big old checklist of everything that we need. So as I said, kind of land with buildings. It needs good access for cars, and ideally not just cars, but, you know, minibuses, vans full of people, all those different things. And we've got also our desirables. So it would be lovely to get a site with a river running through it, or a stream. That's the absolute dream, because you know, it's so good for biodiversity. And so we've got this amazing land agent who is just on the lookout all the time. And so many of these sites as well are coming on the market after we hear about them. So word of mouth, or so and so is selling a farm, or so and so is selling this plot of land. You know, do you want to think about it before it goes in the market? So it's a lot of it is also who you know, which is tricky. But what we're finding, or what we haven't seen yet, but I'm expecting we will see, is that now that the agricultural payment system is changing, and the, you know, farmers won't get the same subsidy payments as they did, farms will slowly go out of business, which is really, really sad. And I don't, you know, I'm not an expert in that area, but I know that some people will be really hard hit by it. So it won't surprise me when more land does become available. But we haven't seen that just yet. So at the moment, it's quite slow. We're getting a site at a rate of about one a month coming through. Quite a few of them are quite big estates, so private estates where, you know, the family's moving on, or, you know, somebody, often just people are moving, but they tend to be enormous and very luxurious. And as much as they would be incredible site, you know, for the land, they often come with a manor house, which we don't need and can't afford. So
that's one hell of a visitor centre, perhaps. I don't know.
We had a grade 2 listed house that we saw the other day, and it was kind of, you know, could we rewild that land and maybe sell the house? But it's sort of, okay, well, which multi-millionaire would like to live in a grade 2 listed house in the middle of a visitor centre? I don't know. If you know anyone, get in touch.
I'm sure there is one. I'm sure there is some eccentric.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. But so it's not easy finding a site. It's really not. And often what you find as well, particularly if it's a farm, that farmer is part of a community, and they want another farmer to take it over because it's been farmed for so long, you know. And so we totally understand that, and that can make it tricky too.
So, okay, so then if I put myself in so I can get a better understanding. So if I put myself in the shoes of a farmer, so would they get from a funding point of view, would they get the sort of the lump sum for the land, or is there a kind of long-term lease? I mean, how would these things work, or potentially work?
So in our position right now, we actually have a funding announcement. But when I spoke to you last time, I think I said, it'll be out by the time we speak, and it still isn't out yet. So there is an announcement to come, but it's not out yet. I don't know if it will be by the time this is published, but we are.
So by the time this is published, then this is probably going to be published a a month, 2 months after recording. So we're recording this on the, where are we? 3rd of June.
Okay. Well, I'm very much hoping that there will be an announcement by July that essentially will indicate that we are in a good position this year, potentially to have enough money to acquire our first site, potentially.
Yeah.
And so we could find ourselves potentially, you know, by September, we might be in a position to be a cash buyer. We could be.
Yeah.
If all goes to plan. And so from a farmer's point of view, you know, you want to sell your farm, and a group comes along and says, we want to take your land and totally change everything about it, pretty much, probably. So a farmer will have put a lot of work into maintaining the hedgerows, the access to get the land fertile, to all of these things carefully engineered for their system. That, you know, they need to make money. It's carefully engineered, and so it's challenging when a group comes along and says, oh, all of that hard work you've put in, we're probably just going to let it go, in their eyes, to rot, because it is turning what's, you know, a productive bit of land into something that isn't productive in a traditional sense. So it's challenging. But what we're seeing as well is so many different farmers that like no farmer is the same. There's a spectrum. Everyone has different interests, and some people, you know, some of them are so into rewilding and they love it and they embrace it, you know.
So it was something that was interesting that was in the news the other day about the government paying older farmers to and whether it's a generational thing where old school farmers, farmers working under old incentives operate in that way, and the new farmers working on new incentives new incentives and new sort of a greater understanding of nature are going to operate more in that way.
So there's new system for agricultural payments, so the ELM scheme, Environmental Land Management Scheme, and no one exactly knows how that is going to look yet, but the idea is that it's a lot more flexible than the existing countryside stewardship scheme. That was designed in line with the EU directives. And for example, one of the major things that was an issue with the EU's directive was that farmers would get penalised, for example, if they didn't clear scrub, because scrub management was part of the programme. We now know that scrub is actually really valuable habitat, but there wasn't that flexibility before for that to be part of a system that you'd get paid for. So these new systems coming in, and it's going to be very different to the old one, because there's going to be all sorts of new ideas in there that people are going to have to get on board with if they want to receive those payments. So I guess that's the government's thinking, is that they want, you know, fresh thinking, that people can get on board with their new way of doing things.
So this is public money for public good. That's the phrase, isn't it?
Exactly. And we're really hopeful about that. And everyone in the sector is really hopeful about it and looking forward to it, because in theory, it will be great. And I've been to a few webinars about it now. I've learned how it works. And, you know, in theory, it's still being designed. And we submitted a response to the consultation, because we didn't really think personally that there was enough flexibility in there for rewilding, because it's slightly more experimental. So because the payments are based on, you know, you do this and you get an outcome. What happens if you're leaving the land to go fallow? What happens if you're just letting it do its thing? There's kind of, oh, you'll get this much a year for that. So that's what the main, you know, flaw that we pointed out. So we're interested to see how that will be. But yeah, I'm guessing that's the government's thinking behind that. But it's a bit scary, because I personally am quite worried that if there's not enough support for farmers in the UK, our farms will disappear and we'll be importing all of our food. And that's a very scary position to be in.
Sorry, say again, Hannah? You cut out.
None of us want to be in that position. You don't want to be relying on imports from other countries for your food. It's just crazy. So really hoping that's not the future we're heading towards.
Well, I guess it's a balancing act, really, isn't it? It's you know, I'm thinking perhaps the smaller farms will will be swallowed up by perhaps larger farms as part of that as well. I don't know, but
I'm hoping that farmers that can be a bit more adaptable will survive. So, for example, Wild Ken Hill in Norfolk used to be all arable, I believe, and it's now been taken over by Dominic Buskell, who is a young man from a management consultancy background, and he looked at the income streams and he looked at the consequences of Brexit, and he decided that the farm needed to diversify. So they now have regenerative farming, they have rewilding, and they have conservation, 3 distinct areas that all make money in different ways. And I think that is the way to go about it. Don't limit yourself. Don't box yourself into committing to one and only one type of income stream. If the land can accommodate multiple things, go for it, because it keeps you financially stable in the long term.
Yeah, that's interesting you say about Dominic, because I got in contact with him, and I don't know, he didn't look like a farmer to me. I thought, yeah, someone does it. He looked too clean cut and not sort of.
He's very good at it today. I got a tour, and he was very efficient getting through all the mud. So.
But good on him.
Yeah.
Good on him. No, but that's really interesting. I'm glad you bring this up, because they are at Wild Ken Hill. Again, that's a really good model for for making a viable living via agriculture, and physically reducing your inputs, physically making sure the balance sheet balances, but diversifying the income stream. That's a really good point.
Makes so much sense. And what NEP are doing as well. I personally don't eat meat. I'm vegetarian. Yeah. Most people don't really like meat, and I don't like intensive farms. But people don't like meat. But what NEP are doing, which is again rewilding, low input, they looked at their budget spreadsheet, realised that they couldn't carry on, spraying pesticides all over the land and hoping that it suddenly would work. So then they have now free range animals that need very little maintenance. They can breed. Most rewilding projects use species that can breed on their own, that don't need intensive vet input. So it's a lot cheaper.
Because that's the one thing about perhaps that gets lost in the conversation, is the business case. Again, we've talked about this previously on the podcast. It's the business case. There is the emotive case, but there is the massively strong business case as well. I mean, like what you guys are doing as well. There is the numbers stack up.
Well, so when I left the PhD, I was very frustrated at how much plastic was wasted. Emissions from that. And so when I got my first volunteer job in conservation, I thought it was all going to be very different, and that they'd think about carbon emissions and that sort of stuff. And actually I was quite shocked, because wildlife conservation, habitat management, so if you're going to intensively engineer a habitat to fit a plan, really, really like emission intensive. So we would drive to work in our cars, load up a Land Rover and trailer with various different power tools, and then drive that Land Rover sometimes an hour away. Big old diesel Land Rover, you drive it an hour away, and then you get your chainsaws and your bits and bobs out and top them up with fuel, do what you needed to do, whack it all in, drive. So actually the carbon emitted from that was really heavy, and we were all all of the different land management teams were doing that every single day. And then also no, I won't say that. I won't say about the cows.
That's all right.
Well, you've also got cows on your site managing the site, and so if you have too many cows, they emit methane. So overall, it's pretty carbon heavy. And I just remember thinking, is this because I was going out every day and doing these things. The management plan says that you do this. The management plan says that, and I think, well, why? Why do we have to do that? And I keep, I'd ask people that all the time. Why do we have to cut that tree down? Why do we have to do this? And then it just clicked, because they said, well, because there's no animals here to do it. Oh, but why aren't there animals here to do it? Well, and then you look at the way that our countryside is, and it's kind of towns, and everything's fenced and everything's gated. So you don't have herds of cattle and pigs and ponies and all those different things roaming through your countryside anymore, doing what they used to do. So to me, when I learned about rewilding, I was like, this is so sensible, because they do it for you for free. It feeds them, it keeps them happy, and it just makes so much sense.
No, it really does. And I think that, when there is, 10, 20, 30 years of data, that comes out, which again, when people are going for funding, you can kind of see it. So it's not just
Yeah.
an emotive for you point when you see that. I was it was a really great podcast I did back end of last year, where I was talking to in a similar note than the chairman of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and it really brought it home to me that he said, because he was farming, with nature, combining farming and nature, his pesticide use was down by like 50%, and he saved over 20,000. It was either 20,000 litres of diesel or 20,000 pounds by not cultivating.
Yeah.
And that again, it really brought it up to me that, again, as it goes on and the soil health increases, and you're not employing loads of people, that your inputs are they are decreased. I think it's as simple as that, really.
Well, I think we're just learning really that the old ways worked. So when
yeah, so I shouldn't laugh, but it's so bloody obvious, isn't it? It's like, nature's done it. Nature's done all right for the last 10 billion years, and we've come along in the last 50 years and changed it. And perhaps we could be wrong.
Well, at Wild Ken Hill, when I went there for my day, so I was really lucky. I got the whole tour. I was hosted for a day. It was wonderful. And when I was there, they were explaining, that they were always reviewing what they're doing on their regenerative farming areas to see, okay, how can we cut pesticides? How can we cut all of these different things? And then they were showing me a diagram where they're thinking about having fields on rotation, which is like one of the most basic things. I remember learning about this in school, how farming should be on rotation, leaving the land to rest. And then they have, what they're doing there is having cover crops, so that over the winter, the soil isn't just bare and being, hammered by the rain. There's actually crops there fixing nitrogen, keeping the soil healthy, and that they'll have, and they're in a trial kind of what animals can they have on those cover crops, eating, recycling the soil, putting the dung back on the soil, and just having that in rotation with the animals working their way around. Can we have chickens? Can we have whatever?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, this is actually to some people so revolutionary. It's just going back to the old ways. So I feel like we've pushed the boundaries really as far as we can when it comes to how productive can we make land. We've pushed that boundary too far, and now we're just bouncing back.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you say about learning about that at school. So coming full circle, really. I mean, we've talked in the past about youth engagement. Do you? Can you give me what Heal are doing with regards to youth engagement?
Sure. So when I originally was contacted by Jan about Heal, it was because the wildlife group I'd set up was quite dominated, I guess, by young people, which was the polar opposite to all of the other groups locally. And I didn't engineer that on purpose. It just, I guess, when I promote things, I just naturally promote it on the channels that I use, and that attracts people from the channels that, similar things. Yeah. So I've been noticed in the area because, oh, look at this group of young people going to the local councils. What are they doing? So it was great. And so when she contacted me, she said, we really need young people in this organisation because we've got 6 trustees. And she'd done a similar thing, met people that were of similar backgrounds to her, talked about the charity and asked if they'd be trustees. And they said yes, because you just, when you're starting on a mission like that, it's who that can help you. And so she looked at the trustees and realised, oh, we haven't got any young people here. We probably should have a youth panel. And so she asked me if I could help with that. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And when I advertised for the panel, originally, this is my capacity as a volunteer before I was hired. I put out just a very sort of informal express your interest, not an application, nothing like that. And I thought, we'd have to go out and recruit people and find people. And I was totally blown away because we were swamped, absolutely swamped. And if I could go back in time and change the process, I might, because I just had no idea how many young people would be interested in being on a panel like that. It was over 100 people, and we didn't even advertise it in that way. It just people found us. And so when I was looking at the people who'd applied, so many of them were like me, so working in conservation, or so many of them had always loved nature and loved wildlife and were birders from very young because mum and dad were into wildlife, that kind of story. And I looked at all those people and I thought, those people are brilliant, but they're all from the same pot, which is the same kind of people that are in all of the nature charities right now. And then I looked at the people who didn't have that background. So people who were in pharmaceuticals, my old sector, who were in finance, who were doing jobs that, let's be honest, they didn't really feel passionate about, they just landed up in.
Yeah.
And they had that kind of moment where they realized climate change, biodiversity crisis was huge and they needed to do something. So they were kind of the converters, kind of how I think about them, people who have realized later. And so I actually tried my best to interview most of those people from that background, because they have so much more to add, especially when you're, as a charity, trying to reach new people.
As you're talking, I think this is so good, because the skill sets, the varied skill sets you bring, or you bring into the party. I mean, this fills me with so much hope, because again, you don't want to be too focused on, I'm a conservationist and I'm just thinking in my silo and that's it. But that the varied skill sets, that fills me with so much hope that for the future of Hill.
Because also I've been part of a few similar things before for different charities, and so you're sitting in a room full of young people who are so enthusiastic about nature.
Yeah.
Okay, how can we reach more young people? And they say, oh, let's do a tree hunt, and let's do a bug day, and let's do all of these things. And I think none of my friends outside of this world would come to that. And so if you're talking to the same people with similar interests all the time, all they're going to suggest is things that they would like to do.
It's a bit of as you're saying that, it's a bit of a tired, formulaic. Yeah.
So that Blue Planet and all of those David Attenborough style things inspire people. So things that people can do from the comfort of their own home in their own time. And that's the difference. We need to make nature more accessible. So that's what the youth panel are really good at, because they all have different backgrounds. Some of them are in school, some of them are in uni, some of them are after uni employed. And so you've got that variety, and one's a politics student, one's a management consultant. They all do different things, and that really helps, because they then know what kind of thing is going to interest their peer group. And so you're breaking away from that echo chamber, which is so important.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, actually, echo chamber. Yeah. Aren't we doing well? We're really good. Yes, that's Cool, Hannah. Wow, we're just coming up to 55 minutes. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about? Because this is I feel that we could probably talk for about another 4 hours, to be honest.
I guess on the land front, because I find people are always really interested in kind of how we're going to manage land and what we're going to do with it.
Yeah.
Decisions. We are thinking at the moment, and I've just been putting together a flow chart of decisions, all the possible scenarios that could happen.
Yeah.
Someone says you should plant wildflowers. Someone says you should plant trees. Someone says you should reintroduce a species. I'm now going through all these checklists of things, and essentially what we're trying to do is be as hands-off as possible. So you have to think, can nature do this itself? Can a jay fly into this field and plant an acorn here? If the answer is yes, and if that's a likely thing that's going to happen, nature should be allowed to do it, because it knows what it's doing best. Trees will naturally regenerate in places that suit it, where it has enough nutrients, where it has the support. If you plant a tree where you think it should be, it's going to struggle. So that's just basically one of the reasons I love rewilding so much, and why I love Heal so much, is that, and why I think other people love this kind of thing so much, is it's about taking a step back and accepting that actually we know a lot and we are very clever, but we don't know everything. It's really exciting in the future to think about what could happen if we actually learn as a species to step down every now and again and stop trying to tightly control everything so much. It's really exciting, it's experimental, and you never know what will happen. And yeah, I just love it.
So I'm interested with that flow chart. So you guys and the trustees are thinking about how much you want to intervene, because it's quite interesting. I want to go back to that point, because next week I'm going to at the time, what was it? Yeah, beginning of June, I'm going back to Net for how to rewild your garden. And I always feel there is this underlying push and pull between, how much intervention do we need? How much intervention do you need? How much intervention do people feel comfortable with? It's an interesting debate, actually.
So you've got to sort of think about what is missing from the landscape. And so one of the major things that's missing is free roaming animals, as we talked about earlier. So they would be ploughing up the soil, but very gently and at a low intensity. They'd be stamping around. They would be rubbing up on trees and removing the bark from trees. They would be nibbling at things. So all of those really low intensity things, if you think about like your garden, they aren't really happening, because you don't, just go up to your tree and randomly whip a bit off it or snap a twig or those different things. You just don't think to do that. You wouldn't naturally get a mini wildfire in your garden and have an area be decimated and then regenerate and new things come through and flood and all these different things that those just aren't happening. And they aren't happening in our landscape because we've controlled it so much. So we've straightened all our rivers and put them in channels, and we have areas that are like no-go zones where people and animals don't walk through, so the soil doesn't get disturbed. So because you don't have those mini disturbances happening all the time, you don't get that variety in habitat, which is why you don't get that variety in species. So if you can think about a space in that kind of setting and think it needs to be random, the disturbance needs to be low intensity, but just unpredictable. And if you can keep things unpredictable, then you'll get that variety, because basically it's all about diversity. And so the way to get an abundance and diversity of species is to give them a diversity of habitats. Next, for example, love bare earth. So have you got any bare earth in your garden? Most people don't. It's either paved or it's grass. So just little things like that.
It's interesting, like you say about bare soil. Like I interviewed a really famous gardener, and he was saying that as a gardening profession, we see empty soil or bare soil as a dirty word, but it's looking at within a garden setting is everything. You may not be able to put a label on it, but everything is a different habitat type. Some are so nuanced as well. And I think we need, from a garden point of view, I think we do need to, the aesthetic is going to be important, but looking at our gardens as, there's habitat types, not just this is the aesthetic, this is the habitat type, and we must embrace the difference, I think.
Well, No Mow May has just finished, and this has been running for several years. So the whole idea of excuse the weeds, we're feeding the bees thing, that's been going around for so long now. It's not complicated.
No.
People struggle with it so much still. I'm seeing on Twitter all the time people saying that their parents come round for a cup of tea and they get lectured all the time about brush, or there's such a mindset shift still that we need to go through.
Sorry, say again, Hannah?
Obsessed with tidiness.
Yeah, we are. Sorry, yeah, we are. We're. But it will it will change, and like we were talking about before the podcast, I do see that window. I do see that window realistically next 5 years where it becomes the norm for, especially for councils, because we were talking a couple of weeks ago about a piece of research that you've seen about, was it quarter of quarter of county councils are rewilding or reducing their management of their grasslands,
or have at least rewilding in their plans. So even if they're not doing it yet, I think it was a quarter of councils at least have plans to rewild, which is great. And, you know, coming back to that point about the business element, it's just so much cheaper.
Well, it is, and this was but then this is a really good. So this is a really good thing that came up. So I was talking to James Mallender. He is a county councillor, a district councillor for Suffolk, and he made a really sober, description of it. He said, what we are doing is, the land management budget, I'm cost neutral, because what the guys are doing is they are, they're not mowing 70 sites now, which frees up, that amount of time, which then allows us to do the more labor intensive weed killing. So they don't use Roundup, they use a non-toxic foam system, which takes a lot longer, which they've got to go back 3 or 4 times. But
they've got more time because they're not constantly mowing verges or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's a real, it's a real strong case, because James Mallender as a person, he's very, he knows his stuff, but he's very sober, and he and as a district councillor, he's got, he's using public money, so he feels and he felt that responsibility quite strongly, and he's got to keep it to the budget. So it's a strong undeniable business case.
The more of that we see and the less fake grass we see, the better.
Well, on that note, I think we agree that every artificial lawn company needs to have a strong word with itself. And I can't. Who would want a artificial lawn? I don't get it.
Well, I think my neighbours potentially.
Oh, well, then you need to get new neighbours. I think you need to move out.
I cover my house so extensively in bird boxes and bee boxes and all those things.
Yeah.
It just subliminally goes across. We'll get there. Just when all the swifts are in my garden and not theirs, we'll see. Maybe it changes their mind.
Yeah.
I live in hope.
So Hannah, thank you very much for doing this podcast. It's been really good. Do you want to give so where can people find out about yourselves, yourself on LinkedIn and Hill in general?
So we are Heal Rewilding, and all of our Instagram. Start again. We are Heal Rewilding, and all of our social media handles are at Heal Rewilding, all one word. And our website is healrewilding.org.uk. There's lots of information on there about our plans, about us. You can dive into that. We've got all of our intentions for biodiversity, climate change. You can read all about that there, and all of our events. So we do regular webinars. All of that sort of stuff is kept up to date on social media. So give us a follow.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. It's been great. Really appreciate you doing this. Cool. There we go. Let's just cancel, stop recording.